Hi, and welcome to College Planning Untangled, where we try to simplify the lives of our parents and our kids that are going off to college. And today, what we're going to talk about is this new digital AC.
Nope.
Bobby, I'm going to let you talk about what's happening in the ACT and what parents need to
Oh,
know.
yeah. Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. So I had meant to put SAT there in the title. Uh,
Oh, I'll change it now, but you
okay,
keep
cool.
going,
Yeah,
talking.
yeah. No, sorry about that. Yeah, I missed that. So the SAT went digital starting in March of this year, and then last week we talked about the new shorter ACT that's going to be coming in a year. So the ACT has now changed. Has announced that they're going to change their format to be similar to the new digital SAT. When we talked last week about how the ACT was going to make its test shorter, I thought let's take a quick time today to update on this new digital SAT. So last fall for the PSAT, they started with the new digital PSAT, and then they started this March with the new digital SAT. And we talked about some concerns about it before, and a lot of tutors nationwide were very leery about the test changing and how it would create some problems. And so, for instance, like my friend David Blowbaum posted last year a blog post that said, just don't prep for the digital SAT. And so I just put that link into the chat. Like, literally, this was from a year ago. And he just advised people, just don't prep for it. Wait until this test is a known quantity before you mess with it. Right. And his reasons back then were it's new, it's changing. Every time the SAT changes, the test doesn't necessarily match what the practice tests were. There aren't enough practice tests, things like that. So what's happened now, we've had the March was the first actual digital SAT that was administered. And then we had May and June. There's going to be another one coming in August, and then it's going to continue this fall. So I have students that have prepped for all of those tests. And so after the scores have come in from March and May and June, tutors nationally are in an absolute panic about this test. Scores just aren't coming back that are consistent with what the students have been doing. That's what we were afraid was going to happen, right? And so, in my experience, what has happened with my students, if you take the students that they took, there are only 6 practice tests available for the new digital SAT. So, one of the things is basically the students take the 6 practice tests. That's all you can do, right? You can take tests from other prep companies that aren't from College Board, but those aren't that similar to the real test, right? Nobody can really make the questions except College Board. And so you've got these 6 tests. And so my students who've taken those practice tests, a lot of them increase their scores a whole lot. They're getting really good scores on practice tests. And then about half of them are going in and getting scores that match those scores, and the other half aren't. And that's very unusual for me, right? In the
Right.
ACT world, my students, we have basically unlimited real pass tests that students can take. As long as my students take enough tests to get consistency, they know what score they're going to go get on test day. And if they go in and they don't get that score, it's probably because they stayed up too late or they were freaked out by something or something weird happened in the test room. And then they just go take it again, right? So what's happened is this inconsistency in scoring, for me, it was about half of my students or so, which is very distressing. For I think a lot of tutors nationally, what they're getting is just that the SAT score appears to be almost a random number compared to the practice test, right? There's
Well,
students
and
that be
here's
getting something. Yeah,
here's
go
a
ahead.
question, Bobby. You guys see that because you see the behind the scenes. But is a college admissions board going to really understand that and see that? Are they hearing that?
That's the question, right? And
Yeah.
so, I mean, so what's happening in the National Test Prep Association, which I'm a member of, I mean, tutors are absolutely just saying, like, they did an internal poll, like we do this on Facebook polls, all sorts of polls every week. Just us comparing notes on things. And they're like, what are you saying now about the new digital SAT? And it was, prep for either SAT or ACT, prep for both, prep for either one. And then like one of the choices was run as fast as you can away from the new digital SAT. And about 75% of the tutors chose that option on the poll, right? So basically, I am less concerned than some other tutors, as in half my students did go get killer scores, right? And the half who didn't,
your students are doing okay. But the question and the scary part about that, Bobby, is you've got half that are going, what the hell? And here's my question on that. Yeah. Are the half that are going, what the hell, what's going on? When they're retaking it, are they seeing, is it flip-flopping or is it consistent with that one student?
Well, this is the thing. All we've had is March, May, and June, right?
Okay.
Those are the only tests that have happened. And so here's what I did with every single one of my students who got a score that was inconsistent. I said, hey, how about you take the ACT? And they all went and took the ACT and they all killed it. And they're all super happy and they're never going to look at the SAT again. So I told them, like, those that got the score, great, they're done. Those that didn't, I just said, okay, screw the SAT, take the ACT. And what is very helpful to know is that all 100% of my students who had prepped for SAT and then shifted over to ACT found the ACT very easy to prep for quickly, because this is how it was in the past as well. The SAT is still tricky and confusing and dense. And so if you prep for the SAT, if you switch over to the ACT, suddenly the ACT seems so much easier in comparison. And so students find themselves, but what is very interesting to me is that all of those students I'm talking about, they switched to the ACT. They got a very high score on the first one they took at home. They took a couple more, got the same high score, went and took the real test and got the same high score or even higher. Consistency. That's what we want, right? Whereas on the SAT, I said, look, you can keep fighting with the SAT if you want, but I do not advise it, right?
Well, and Bobby, as you told us, they put that level of complexity into the SAT where if you answer certain questions, you get pushed into that higher end or that lower end.
Right.
I mean, you know this, anytime you do that with a software program,
right,
it creates complexity.
Yeah. So, absolutely.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting. So what is the SAT, what are they going to do with that?
Well, that's the question. And so, I mean, I guess we can take just a quick minute to talk about what this, supposedly means, right? Or like what we think it means, right? We don't know why the test scores are coming back different because they don't release the tests, right? They used to. ACT releases 3 tests every year, real tests. So every year we have 3 more ACTs to look at. The SAT has not released any of the new digital SATs and has no plan ever to. So we are now in a world where we are never going to get another released real test. And so what would happen in the past, if a student did poorly, you would have them order their, the question and answer service, and you'd go through and see, okay, here are the kinds of questions you missed. And then you would say, as happened in 2015, 2016, when they changed, you would get the real test and you'd look at it and you'd say, oh, this test is not similar to those practice tests they put out. The practice tests look like this. These tests look different. Oh, okay, now we can change our materials. What we're suspecting is that the actual test is different enough from those 6 practice tests that exist that students are prepared based on the practice test, and then they're coming in and getting a test that looks different, but we don't know. I mean, students are reporting. If you ask students, okay, did the test feel different? They say, oh my gosh, there was all this stuff I had never heard of on the test. But of course, students say that after every test, right?
Right.
But so they're like, oh, it was full of calculus. And you're like, no, there's never any calculus on the test, right?
Bobby,
it just looked hard.
What was their reasoning for not sharing the tests?
I mean, as always, there is no reasoning, right? It's just, it's digital. We don't share it anymore. Whatever. I mean, there was no reasoning given. Yeah. But it's very easy to figure out the reasoning because the answer to every question always in the world is money, right? The reason is it's a lot cheaper because if that way they can keep recycling questions and using them in more tests. But if they release them, then they can never use those questions again because they've been built.
That makes sense. Yeah, I get it.
It's just saving money. It's cheaper to do that, right? And that's all. And so now, of course, the ACT is going to be making this change a year from now. And we're just hoping that ACT is not going to go down this road and go purely digital and start not releasing tests. That would be a disaster and really hurt the market, leadership they've got. But anyway, that's all. I just wanted to update people. Like, if people come to me and say, I want to tutor for SAT, I say, okay, but I make them get on the phone with me and I talk through this thing and I say, you need to understand that there is some 50% chance or so that you're going to end up having to switch over to the ACT. Right. And the other piece that's important here is if you are a high scorer and could possibly score high enough on the PSAT to be a National Merit Scholar, then you got to prep for the PSAT and the SAT anyway. And so for those students, I'm like, yep, prep for that PSAT, SAT. Maybe you're going to kill the whole
students,
thing.
I mean, you're going to have to make sure that they know what they're walking into.
And so that's the thing is, like, as long as they understand that prepping for the SAT does prep you well for ACT. So it's fine. Just be aware. You're probably going to end up taking the ACT at the end. And what's really frustrating is I can't predict who's in the 50% that's going to be consistent and who's not. And if I could predict that, it'd be a lot easier to.
Well, you see where I was going with my question though, Bobby. I'm interested. Is it a crapshoot where it's like every other time? And
right. And so, well, see, and this is what, what it kind of was with the past SAT too, which is like, well, go ahead and take the SAT a couple more times and probably eventually you'll get there. Right. I mean, that's the answer is, it probably is like, but I suspect actually that it's not. I suspect that that there's a particular way of thinking to get around, like if the SAT is going to throw weird stuff you've never seen at you, there are some students who can use their prep that they went through to like see the pattern in that question and go, oh, okay, I can see how to do something with this. Right. And then other students, when they're prepping, are just like, these are the strategies for these types of questions. And so it's something about that, right? But it's very hard to predict which students are like that. And so I don't think taking another one would necessarily help. But the ACT, very predictable. And so that's the answer, right? If you want to avoid all this, just focus on the ACT for now. And that is it.
All right. Well, thank you for the update. It's